What happened in the year 1961? This video is specific to the year 1961. Before the main feature, I'd like to tell you about the comics and cartoons that debuted this year. Comic strip debuts of 1961. Amy, a funny comic strip about a young blonde girl with a ponytail. It wasn't a mega hit like some strips, but it ran until 1991. Apartment 3G. This was a hugely popular soap opera strip that ran until 2015. Flintstones. The Flintstones got their very own comic strip in 1961. It never became as popular as the cartoon series or comic books, but it ran until 1998. A pretty impressive run. Health capsules. This popular panel answers readers' health-related questions and includes a humorous illustration. Peanuts. The Peanuts comic strip had been around since 1950, but the character of Frida, with her naturally curly hair, made her debut in 1961. This is also the year we first hear about the little red-haired girl, Charlie Brown's unattainable Venus. Sam Strip. This unique gag strip only ran from 1961 to 63. It was created by Mort Walker and Jerry Dumas. Walker had already been famous for his super successful strips Beetle Bailey and High and Lois. It featured a lot of cameos of other comic strip characters, a practice that, surprisingly, still isn't done all that often. As far as Sam Strip was concerned, that was the main thing. Although this comic strip didn't last, it later inspired the sequel strip, Sam and Silo, in 1977. Although that one was more of a regular comic strip, it was far more popular and ran until 2016. Comic book debuts of 1961. Archie Comics. The Archie Comics publisher isn't usually remembered for their superheroes. What may surprise you is the fact that they had a lot of them at one time, going way back to the golden age of comics when the publisher was still called MLJ. In 1961, Archie released two new heroes. Fly Girl, the sexy sidekick of the Fly, first appeared in Adventures of the Fly number 13. The Jaguar made his very first appearance in Adventures of the Jaguar number 1. Charlton Comics. Charlton had a thing this year of making comic book series based on new monster movies. These included Gorgo, Conga, and Reptilicus. The most successful of these would be Gorgo. The series ran until 1965. It expanded upon the story that started with the movie. Gorgo and her baby were actually the heroes of these comics and had fantastic adventures. Conga was also a successful series. Reptilicus lasted only 2 issues before Charlton's rights to use the name lapsed. Beginning with the 3rd issue, it was retitled Reptosaurus and ran through 1962 with issue number 8. After that, it had a one-shot special in 1963. Also in 1963, Reptosaurus made a cameo in Charlton's other movie monster-based comic, Gorgo number 12. DC Comics. At this time, DC was still in the process of rebooting some of their older characters. They had a lot of success with this after they redid The Flash in 1956. 2 characters to get the treatment this year included the Atom and Hawkman, both having made their original debuts in 1940. The Atom people got to know better made his debut in Showcase number 34. He wasn't the first miniature superhero by a long shot, but he became one of the most popular along with Marvel's later creation, Ant-Man. The new Hawkman, and Hawkgirl as well, debuted in Brave and the Bold number 34. It was now established that they were aliens. DC also introduced Earth 2 and, on a bigger scale, the concept of a multiverse in The Flash number 123. The new Flash character meets the old Flash character. DC ran two different mainstream continuities for many years. This would lead to a lot of confusion and contradiction where the older comics were concerned. On a personal note, I never liked multiverses or alternate realities in comics. It never worked then, and it doesn't work now. It just confuses people and gets them uninterested in the characters. Then the publisher has to reboot everything again. The original Batgirl, real name Betty Kane, debuted in Batman number 139. She was the blonde sidekick of the original Batwoman. An entirely new Batgirl character was created in 1967 and became much more popular. Sinestro, Green Lantern's most popular villain, debuted in Green Lantern Volume 2, number 7. One of Superman's best-known villains, General Zod, made his comic debut this year in Adventure Comics number 283. He didn't become really popular until the movies Superman and Superman 2 in 1978 and 81. Then again with Man of Steel in 2013. He's notable for being one of Superman's most bloodthirsty foes. The Haunted Tank made its debut in GI Combat number 87. Set in World War II, a tank is haunted by Confederate General Jeb Stuart to help America win the war. Stuart's ghost could only be seen by his descendants or soldiers who were dying. Dell Comics. Magica de Spell makes her debut in Uncle Scrooge number 36. She became even more popular in the classic DuckTales cartoon of the 1980s. Magica was an evil Italian sorceress duck. And who doesn't love that name? Mad Magazine. The famous comic magazine from the EC Comics publisher came out with two popular long-running features this year. Dave Berg wrote and drew The Lighter Side of, which was a gentle satire on everyday subjects. It ran until 2002. Spy vs. Spy, created by Antonio Prohias, became one of the most famous parts of Mad Magazine, period. The premise is simple. A spy in white and a spy in black try to wipe each other out. You don't always know which color is going to win until the end. Marvel Comics. Amazing Adventures number 1 came out this year. It was the first series of this name from Marvel. This issue also marked the first appearance of Dr. Droom, Marvel's very first Silver Age of Comics superhero. He was a supernatural monster hunter. You haven't heard of Dr. Droom? Don't feel too bad. He didn't stick around long. By issue number 7, the series was reformatted and retitled as Amazing Adult Fantasy. The character of Dr. Droom remained in obscurity for years as Marvel had much more success with others like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, to name only a few. He would not return in comics until 1976, when he was renamed to Dr. Druid. Why was he renamed? This was done to avoid confusion with Marvel's popular supervillain, Dr. Doom, who would make his first appearance in 1962. Amazing Adult Fantasy also started in 1961. Of course it started with issue number 7, but it ran to number 14 under this title. The series didn't take well and was set to be cancelled. With number 15, in 1962, the title was renamed to just Amazing Fantasy. Why is any of this significant? Because that's the issue that introduced Spider-Man and became one of the most famous comic book covers of all time. Not too bad for a series that flopped. Fantastic Four number 1 introduced a superhero team of the same name. It also introduced their first major villain, Mole Man. This was Marvel's very first big success. It was their initial answer to DC's popular Justice League of America comics. It wouldn't be until 1963 that Marvel created a more direct rival with their Avengers comics. The Fantastic Four was unique on a number of levels. The team was actually like a family. They didn't have secret identities since everyone knew their real names. Their superhero names were more like nicknames. There was a lot of humor in it, especially in the early years, along with some very unique storytelling. The superhero team also had regular people problems like paying rent, relationship troubles, and other such things. They were very relatable. The characters also had their own unique personality quirks and things going on. The Fantastic Four, certainly at this time, was a very interesting comic. Stan Lee gets the credit for creating the Fantastic Four. It really broke him out as Marvel's main man, and, ultimately, the most famous person to ever work in comic books. The creation of Fantastic Four, along with many other Marvel heroes, has been in great dispute. Jack Kirby, who was the original artist for Fantastic Four, had created the earlier team of Challengers of the Unknown for DC back in 1957. There are a lot of similarities between these two teams. The Fantastic Four got so much more popular. This has always been a hot button in the Stan Lee-Jack Kirby feud. Cartoon debuts of 1961. AP Films, Jerry Anderson. Supercar. This really isn't a cartoon, but it's certainly a children's show. Supercar debuted in Britain. It was a sci-fi adventure show using marionette puppets, a process creator Jerry Anderson called supermarionation. This did very well and led to 3 later series: Fireball XL5 in 1962, Stingray in 1964, and his most famous production, Thunderbirds, in 1965. All of these shows would eventually find their way onto American television. Art Clokey. Davy and Goliath. Art Clokey, creator of Gumby, also created this Christian-themed cartoon series with similar stop-motion animation. It ran for 3 seasons through 1964, then had a 2-season revival from 1971 to 73. 7 specials were made from 1965 to 2004. Disney. Ludwig von Drake. This legendary character made his debut in the first episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. He would later appear in the Donald Duck comic strip later that year and receive his own comic book series from Dell. For some reason, the character never really takes in comics, but is used quite heavily on television and other special productions. He was a goofy Austrian scientist and uncle to Donald Duck. 101 Dalmatians. This theatrically released animated film was a major hit and easily the most popular cartoon to have come out in 1961. Who doesn't love lots and lots of spotted puppies? It also features one of Disney's best known and most bizarre villains, Cruella de Vil. Does she ever get her Dalmatian puppy coat? I think not. Format Films. The Alvin Show. The first cartoon series of Alvin and the Chipmunks aired for 1 season on CBS. It was shown in reruns quite a bit for the rest of the decade and for a short time in 1979. The revival series of the 1980s became much better known and longer lasting. Reruns of this classic were played on the Nickelodeon cable channel from 1994 to 96. No station in America has aired it since. Cartoons from this show have rarely been released on any home media. People seem to like this series and want to see it, but it doesn't get a lot of respect from the people who actually own it. Fred Ladd. The Underseas Explorers. Here we go! The rarest, most obscure cartoon to come out this year. It was a series of short, educational cartoons that aired in syndication. It taught you about marine life. This is so hard to find that you can barely find pictures of it online, let alone any episodes. It is said to be like an underwater version of the later, much more popular Johnny Quest, especially with their foreign boy character named Romby, similar to Haji. Ironically, there would be another cartoon series very similar to this called The Undersea Adventures of Captain Nemo. That came out in 1975 and was a bit more successful, becoming a segment of the popular Captain Kangaroo show. What made the idea work in 1975, but not 1961? Who can say? Hal Seeger. Out of the Inkwell. This was a short-lived revival of the classic Out of the Inkwell cartoons from Fleischer Studios, starring Coco the Clown. Besides the main character himself, it bore little resemblance to the earlier cartoons. It was in color, had sound, and gave Coco more of a supporting cast. There was his girlfriend, Coquette the Clown, and a rival of sorts named Mean Mo. Coco himself was a lot friendlier than he had been in the old days. The on-screen battles between Coco and his creator Max Fleischer could get pretty brutal. Although Fleischer himself was still alive and played a part in developing this cartoon, he really wasn't a big part of the stories. Larry Storch, later of TV's F-Troop fame, did the voices. This was a charming little cartoon series that, sadly, has become a great obscurity. You can't find more than a few of these anywhere. Hopefully, a complete collection will someday find itself on DVD. Hanna-Barbera. Top Cat. This was essentially the Phil Silvers show in cat face. The premise was similar to that sitcom, also known as Sergeant Bilko. It was different for a cartoon because it didn't rely heavily on characters getting beat or blown up. There was a lot of trickery instead, and it was a very smart cartoon. The Yogi Bear Show. Yogi Bear, originally a backing segment of Huckleberry Hound, finally gets his own show. His show marks the debuts of Snagglepuss and Yacky Doodle. K-Row Productions. Calvin and the Colonel. This aired on ABC for just one season. It was an animated remake of Amos and Andy. More accurately, it was like Andy and the Kingfish, since there was no real equivalent of the Amos character. The characters were made into animals to avoid the touchy racial issues that had plagued Amos and Andy. This show belly flopped in the ratings, and barely lasted its one and only season. The connection to Amos and Andy, even with them being animals, really hurt it. The original voice actors of Amos and Andy, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll, appeared on this show. People who were still fans of the real Amos and Andy didn't seem to appreciate the watered-down version of the show they loved so much. Truthfully, this cartoon didn't get a fair shake from anyone. It's not bad at all, especially for a kid-friendly TV cartoon. This is what happens when you pay attention to politics and cancel culture. Much younger people, who have no idea what Amos and Andy was or the controversy behind it, find these cartoons online and seem to like them just fine. Looney Tunes. Not much going on in Looney Tunes this year besides a handful of good cartoons, but they did introduce a new character. Although minor, he was memorable. Hugo the Abominable Snowman made his first appearance in the Bugs Bunny cartoon, The Abominable Snow Rabbit. As far as real Looney Tunes cartoons go, he was not seen again until the spaced out bunny cartoon from the 1980 TV special Bugs Bunny's Bustin' Out All Over. After that, he's made a handful of minor appearances in newer Looney Tunes cartoons. MGM. Real Tom and Jerry cartoons stopped in 1958. They just did. I don't care what anyone says. The classic Tom and Jerry cartoons are still the most popular. Well, MGM didn't have their own animation department anymore, but they still wanted Tom and Jerry cartoons. They hired director Gene Deitch to make new Tom and Jerry cartoons. Rembrandt Films, a studio from Czechoslovakia, did the animation. They ended up making 12 new Tom and Jerry cartoons from 1961 to 62. These cartoons are extremely weird and lack the cuteness that made Tom and Jerry so endearing in the first place. At the time, they were commercially successful, but they were clearly living off the Tom and Jerry name. These cartoons stink. I'm not the only one who thinks so. Rankin Bass. Tales of the Wizard of Oz. This was the second ever cartoon series from Rankin Bass, and the first to feature traditional hand-drawn animation. If you're expecting something like the MGM musical, this ain't it. This is a series of short little cartoons featuring the Oz characters doing various funny things. The animation is crude and cheap. The voice work, however, is quite good, and the stories are creative. It's not one of the studio's best known cartoons, but has a cult following. Had the animation been a little bit better, this could have been a great hit. Such low budgets for TV cartoons can really hurt the final product. UPA. The Dick Tracy Show. The same studio that created Mr. Magoo created this cartoon show of Dick Tracy. It lasted just one season. I like the cartoon, but it's weird. It isn't very much like the Dick Tracy comic strip. The comic strip is a bit more violent and wouldn't translate well into a kid-friendly cartoon show. As a matter of fact, you don't see all that much of Dick Tracy. You see him in the beginning of the cartoon segments and at the end. Rarely will you see him in the middle part of the cartoon. He hands off an important case to one of his more cartoony underlings. The silly character would go after Dick Tracy's classic villains, who always worked in pairs. Some people like this show, and some people hate it. Despite having only one season of episodes, it was successful and aired in reruns for many years. It was brought back in reruns during the 1990 release of the hit film Dick Tracy, but has largely disappeared since then besides a complete series DVD release.